It was a nightmare that I thought would never end. But today I can say that the torture and nightmare are over, and I can be happy again.
That's makeup artist Andri Hernandez, as he reunited with his parents in Capacho, Venezuela. We first covered his case in episode 24. He was detained in the United States with an active asylum case and disappeared into the mega prison CICAT, alongside dozens of men in March, under US President Donald Trump's invocation of the Alien Enemies Act. Now the Venezuelans have been deported to their country of origin in an opaque deal involving the United States, Venezuela, and El Salvador. They emerged from Nayib Bukele's prisons with stories of torture, for which human rights monitors have said since 2023 that the government may be guilty of crimes against humanity. I'm Roman Greci, the editor of El Faro English. This is our weekly podcast, Central America in Minutes.
In Nicaragua, the house arrest of Daniel Ortega's brother
relates more to El Salvador and Honduras than to Guatemala. In the case of Guatemala,
they say globalism comes to die at CIPA, but in El Salvador, it's already dead.
Central America in Minutes, an original podcast by El Faro English.
On Tuesday, El Salvador released the 252 Venezuelan migrants wrongfully deported since March from the United States as part of a three-country prisoner swap. 3 days earlier, 10 detained U.S. citizens and permanent residents were released from Venezuela and, after a brief stop in El Salvador, were flown into Texas by the State Department. As we noted in episode 36, vagueness in whether U.S. or Salvadoran courts had jurisdiction over the Venezuelan deportees allowed for the men to be held without due process for nearly 4 months in the notorious CICAT prison. The Trump administration painted the prisoner swap as a victory. Secretary of State Marco Rubio unironically asserted the U.S. men had been held in Venezuela, quote, without proper due process, and called for the, quote, restoration of democracy in Venezuela. In June, a U.S. federal court found the Trump administration had deported the Venezuelans without the right to habeas corpus and under the unlawful invocation of a centuries-old wartime act. As for Bukele, the de facto Salvadoran president seized the men's release as a chance to bolster his image as Trump's regional broker. In a post on X, Bukele touted the swap as a result of both the United States and El Salvador's, quote, months of negotiations with a tyrannical regime. The Bukele administration was paid $6 million to hold the deportees. A report by ProPublica found that most of the migrants had never been charged for crimes in the United States, while CBS News found that some 3/4 of the men did not have criminal records. Back in Venezuela, the 252 men who had fled to seek asylum in the United States were welcomed home by their families. Attorneys have announced new claims on behalf of some of the deportees to sue the U.S. government and bring them back. Maduro's officials have positioned him as a savior, saying he had rescued the migrants from CICAT. Venezuelan prosecutors have already announced a criminal investigation into the Bukele administration for torture of the men, one regime using their cases to take aim at another. Now we turn to Honduras. A new investigation by Insight Crime reports that at least 23 environmental leaders were killed in the country between 2023 and 2024, keeping the country locked in as the deadliest in Central America and the fourth most dangerous globally for land defenders. In May 2011, then-President of Honduras Porfirio Lobo welcomed around 1,300 local and foreign investors to an economic conference aimed at marking the beginning of a new era of prosperity through nearly 150 development projects under the banner, quote, Honduras is open for business. The government estimated it could attract over $4 billion in investments and generate jobs for 350,000 Hondurans over the following 3 years. Insight Crime reports that opening up the country's natural resources in that way fueled the expansion of drug traffickers, the plundering of natural resources, and violence against environmentalists. Since the declaration that Honduras was open for business, deforestation increased at an alarming rate. According to the investigation, in 2023 alone, more than 3,100 forest fires caused by criminal interests affected hundreds of thousands of hectares of forest. In 2024, the country lost over 40,000 hectares of primary humid forest, one of the highest figures in a decade. Additionally, since the 2009 coup d'etat, at least 142 land defenders have been killed in the country. This is lead investigator Parker Assman.
First, due to their significant economic, political, and social influence, local mayors play an outsized role in facilitating extractive projects that destroy the environment and threaten land defenders. These local officials are able to use this power to manipulate the way in which such projects are presented to affected communities to garner support, and then ensure extractive companies are not held accountable when they fail to uphold the commitments they made.
You'll find the full investigation on the homepage of Insight Crime. And as we covered in early June, much of this corporate rollout is now tied up in the agrarian reform talks aimed at reducing violence and settling disputes over land rights. But unresolved disputes, private and partisan interests, militarization, and organized crime hobble advances, and elections are right around the corner. Hey, before we get on with the show, I want to invite you to join our crowdfunding community. Central American journalism is facing attacks unseen in decades, just as Donald Trump's return to the White House renewed international attention. If you appreciate our journalism, go to support.elfaro.net to help us keep translating Central America. Last, we turn to Guatemala. For more than 50 days, until this Tuesday, the teachers' union, known as STEG, camped out in dozens of tents and tarps across the Central Plaza in front of the National Palace until they were evicted by police. Among other issues is a collective bargaining agreement. They were protesting their discontent with a 5% increase in their salaries. They wanted 15%. But a labor court ruled that the protests violated an order for the union not to take any actions that could affect the country's education, like the suspension of classes, and imposed a fine of 3 million quetzales, or around $384,000. What seemed like a standard fare schoolyard fight between government and union had strong political overtones. President Bernardo Arévalo has faced intense criticism from his own base for not taking more decisive action in political disputes, like to remove the internationally sanctioned Attorney General. Whereas the union leader, Joviel Acevedo, is known for negotiating with governments in power by wielding his influence with teachers. He was sanctioned for corruption by the U.S. State Department in 2023 for allegedly accepting kickbacks in the construction of union facilities. Strikingly, Acevedo publicly admits that he has not taught for at least 17 years, but continues to earn his teacher's salary and seniority bonuses. In 2021, now exiled prosecutor Juan Francisco Sandoval accused Attorney General Consuelo Porras of protecting the union leader from criminal liability for corruption. In contrast to his support for the blockades and the national strike in 2023 that defended the electoral process, Arévalo warned at a press conference in May that, quote, teachers who are not fulfilling their duties will be reported. Joviel Acevedo said that they will take all legal measures to avoid paying the fine. For now, the government can be satisfied, said political analyst Gustavo Berganza, because their firm position in this conflict has given them a breath of political oxygen. Thanks for streaming our weekly podcast, Central American Minutes. Today's episode was written by Edward Grattan, Leirian Colon Santiago, and Juliana Ramazzini. Production and original soundtrack by Omnion. Subscribe and share wherever you do your streaming, and we'll be back next week. Hasta pronto.